world had a habit of sanding a man down. For 3 years, Julian had felt its abrasive touch every single day. It had started the day the Coast Guard called off the search. Ilara was gone. A sudden squall, a small sailboat, a life swallowed by the gray, indifferent churn of the Atlantic. The grief had been a physical thing, a weight that settled in his bones, rounding his shoulders and stealing the light from his eyes. He had become a ghost in his own life, a man defined by a phantom limb, an ache where a wife used to be. He was Julian, the widower, the tragic figure, the man who had lost everything. He'd simplified his life. He sold their sprawling house, the one she'd always said was too big, and moved into a modest apartment downtown. He kept his head down at his architecture firm, taking on small, uninspired projects that required little of the creative fire that had once defined him. His colleagues treated him with a delicate, pitying kindness that was somehow worse than outright neglect. He was a project for them, a problem of morale. He ate alone, he walked alone. He existed in a quiet, gray space of his own making, a world without color, because Ilara had taken all the color with her. And then, on a Saturday drenched in the impossible gold of late spring, he saw her. He was at the farmer's market, a weekend ritual he'd maintained because it was one of the few things that felt normal. The air was thick with the smell of strawberries and fresh soil. He was holding a carton of eggs, examining the pale blue shells, when a laugh cut through the gentle hum of the crowd. It was a sound he knew better than his own heartbeat, a bright, musical cascade of notes that had once been the soundtrack to his entire existence. He froze. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. It couldn't be. It was a trick of memory, a cruel echo played by a mind steeped in loss. He told himself this, his knuckles white on the egg carton. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing the phantom sound away. But when he opened them, he saw her. She was standing 20 feet away by a stall selling artisanal cheeses. Her hair, the color of dark honey, was shorter than he remembered, styled in a chic bob that framed her face. She was wearing a simple white sundress, and the sun caught the curve of her neck, the line of her shoulder, the familiar way she tilted her head when she was amused. She looked radiant, healthy, impossibly, devastatingly alive. And she was not alone. Her hand was resting on the arm of a man. He was tall, dressed in expensive linen, with a smile that was all confidence and polished teeth. He leaned in and murmured something in her ear, and she laughed again. That laugh. It ripped through the fragile scar tissue Julian had built around his heart and left him bleeding in the middle of the crowded market. He thought he was going to be sick. He thought his legs would give out. The eggs slipped from his grasp, and the carton hit the pavement with a series of soft, wet cracks. The sound barely registered. His entire universe had narrowed to the woman in the white dress. Ilara. His Ilara. His dead Ilara. She had died 3 years ago. He had identified a piece of wreckage from the boat. He had attended a memorial service where her family wept, and her friends eulogized the bright, beautiful woman who had been taken too soon. He had scattered ashes, her ashes, they had told him, over the very same stretch of ocean that had supposedly claimed her. He had grieved, he had mourned, he had broken into a million pieces. And there she was, buying cheese with another man. The man handed her a small, wax paper-wrapped parcel. She took it, her fingers brushing his. It was an easy, familiar gesture, the gesture of a lover. And anger, cold and sharp, began to cut through the fog of his shock. It was an anger so profound it felt like a physical force, straightening his spine, clearing his vision. The world, which had been a blur of incomprehensible pain, snapped into focus. She turned, and for a terrifying second, her eyes swept in his direction. He flinched, ducking his head like a criminal, but her gaze passed right over him, unseeing, uninterested. To her, he was just another face in the crowd, a stranger amidst the sea of weekend shoppers. The man put his arm around her waist, and they began to walk away, moving with the slow, languid grace of a couple, with nowhere to be and all the time in the world to get there. Every instinct screamed at him, "Run, flee, go back to the gray apartment and pretend this never happened. Pretend it was a hallucination, the final, cruel trick of a grieving mind." But another part of him, a part he thought had died with her, refused. It was a core of steel buried deep beneath the layers of sadness and resignation. It was the architect in him, the man who believed in structure, in truth, in foundations that could bear weight. And the foundation of his entire life had just been revealed as a lie. He couldn't let them just walk away. He couldn't go back to mourning a woman who was very much alive, laughing in the sun with another man. The past 3 years of his life, a wasteland of pain and sorrow, demanded an explanation. He needed to know. He needed to understand. He had to follow. Dropping a few crumpled bills by the ruined eggs, he took a breath, the air tasting of betrayal. He began to move, his steps quiet and deliberate, melting into the crowd. He kept his eyes fixed on the back of her head, a beacon in the swirling chaos of his shattered world. He was no longer Julian, the widower. He was something else now, a hunter, and he would follow her to the end of the earth if he had to. He would have his answers. Before we continue this journey, I want to welcome you. If you're finding yourself as shocked and invested as Julian is right now, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because you are not going to want to miss how this story unfolds. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. All right, let's get back to it. Julian had a choice to make, and he was already making it. He was following her. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs as he shadowed them through the market. He kept a safe distance, using the flow of the crowd as cover. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a film of his own life. There was the protagonist, a man hollowed out by grief. And there, the impossible plot twist. The dead wife, alive and well, her hand tucked into the crook of another man's arm. They moved with an unhurried ease, stopping to admire a bouquet of peonies, to sample a slice of peach from a farmer's knife. Each smile she gave the man, each casual touch, was a fresh stab of betrayal. Julian watched her expressions, cataloging them. The slight crinkle at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the way she bit her lip when she was considering something. These were his memories. They belonged to him, to their life together. Seeing her share them with someone else felt like a violation, a theft of the most intimate kind. The man was handsome, in a way that spoke of country clubs and inherited wealth. His watch was a subtle, expensive brand. His shoes were Italian leather. He carried himself with an air of breezy entitlement, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Julian felt a surge of pure, unadulterated hatred for him. This man was living the life Julian had lost, or, more accurately, the life that had been stolen from him. They eventually left the market and walked towards a nearby parking garage. Julian's stomach clenched. This was the moment of truth. He couldn't follow them in a car. He quickened his pace, his mind racing. He needed a name, a license plate, something, anything, to anchor this nightmare to reality. He saw them approach a gleaming black Mercedes sedan. The man clicked a remote and the car chirped in response. He opened the passenger door for her, a gesture of practiced chivalry that made Julian's teeth ache. As she slid into the seat, something glinted at her throat, a flash of deep, impossible blue. Julian stopped dead. He knew that glint. It was a sapphire, a custom-cut stone set in a simple platinum chain. He had given it to her on their 5th anniversary. He'd commissioned it himself, working with a jeweler for months to get the color and cut just right. It was the color of the deep ocean, she'd said, the day he gave it to her. The irony was a bitter pill in his throat. The sapphire was unique, one of a kind. just like her, or so he had thought. Seeing that necklace was like a physical blow. It was undeniable proof. This wasn't a look-alike. This wasn't a stranger with a similar laugh. This was Ilara, his Ilara, and she was wearing his gift while she lived a new life built on the ashes of his. The man closed her door and walked around to the driver's side. Julian, spurred by a fresh wave of adrenaline, pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely operate the camera. He fumbled, nearly dropping it, but managed to raise it just as the Mercedes pulled out of its spot. He snapped a quick, blurry photo of the back of the car, capturing the license plate. He stood there, phone in hand, as the car disappeared down the ramp and out into the city traffic. The noise of the market faded into a dull roar. He was alone again, but the solitude felt different now. It wasn't the hollow ache of grief. It was sharp, cold, and focused. It was the quiet of a predator that has found its prey. He walked back to his own car, a sensible, unremarkable sedan, and sat in the driver's seat for a long time, the engine off. He looked at the blurry photo on his phone, a license plate, a starting point. The anger was still there, a white-hot coal in his chest, but it was being tempered by something else, a steely resolve. He had spent 3 years as a victim of circumstance, a passive recipient of tragedy. That man was gone. The architect was re-emerging, the man who designed systems, who understood structure, who knew that for every problem there was a solution. And this was the most complex problem he had ever faced. He drove home, not to the gray apartment that smelled of sorrow, but to a place he hadn't visited in years. It was a small, discreet office he maintained under a different name, the headquarters of a life he had kept separate from Ilara. He unlocked the door, the air inside cool and still. This was his real office, the nerve center of the architectural empire he had built, not as Julian Croft, the respectable mid-level architect, but as Aethelred, the reclusive, almost mythical designer sought after by corporations and governments worldwide. He had kept it a secret from Ilara, a test of sorts. He wanted to be loved for who he was, not for the staggering wealth he had accumulated. He had planned to tell her one day, to lay his entire world at her feet. He had imagined her surprise, her joy. Now, that secret, once a romantic gesture, had become his greatest weapon. He sat down at a large, minimalist desk, empowered on a secure, encrypted computer system. The screen flared to life, illuminating his face. The man staring back at him in the polished black monitor was not the broken widower from the farmer's market. His jaw was set. His eyes were clear and hard. The grief had been burned away, replaced by a cold, calculating fire. He pulled up a secure messaging program and typed a single name, Arthur Vance. Arthur was more than his lawyer. He was the public face of the Aethelred Empire, his most trusted confidant, the only other person in the world who knew the full extent of Julian's success. The message he sent was simple. Arthur, we have a problem. A ghost has reappeared. I need you. He attached the photo of the license plate. An answer came back in less than a minute. A ghost? Julian, what's going on? The impossible, Julian typed. Ilara, she's alive. There was a long pause. Julian could almost feel Arthur's shock through the screen. Finally, a new message appeared. Where are you? The old office. I'm on my way. Don't do anything. Don't contact anyone. Just wait for me. We will handle this. Julian leaned back in his chair, the leather cool against his skin. He closed his eyes. He saw her face, laughing in the sun. He saw the sapphire at her throat. He saw the handsome man with the easy smile. He saw the last 3 years of his life, a meaningless charade of pain. Oh, we will handle this, he whispered to the empty room. The time for grieving was over. The time for building had begun. But he wouldn't be building with steel and glass this time. He would be building a trap, and he would use the truth as his foundation. Arthur Vance arrived within the hour. He was a man who seemed to be composed entirely of sharp angles and expensive tailoring, his silver hair impeccably styled, his eyes radiating a calm, formidable intelligence. He walked into the office, took one look at Julian's face, and his professional demeanor softened into genuine concern. "Julian," he said, his voice low, "tell me everything from the beginning." Julian recounted the morning's events, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. He described the laugh, the white dress, the confident man, and finally, the sapphire pendant. He spoke like an architect detailing a structural failure, focusing on facts, on observable data. The pain was still there, a vast, dark ocean beneath the surface, but he refused to let it show. Emotion was a liability now. When he finished, Arthur was silent for a long moment, his steepled fingers resting against his lips. He stared at the blurry photo of the license plate on the monitor. "Unbelievable," he finally breathed. "To fake one's own death, the audacity, the cruelty." He looked at Julian. "Are you certain it was her? Beyond any doubt?" "The necklace, Arthur," Julian said, his voice flat. "I designed it myself. There isn't another one like it in the world. It was her." Arthur nodded slowly, his mind already shifting from shock to strategy. He was a master of this, of translating raw, chaotic human problems into a series of logical, actionable steps. Okay. The license plate is the key. It's registered in this state. I can have a name and address within minutes. My people are very good." He moved to the desk, his fingers flying across a second keyboard connected to his own encrypted network. Julian watched him, a sense of grim purpose settling over him. This was the first step. Information was power, and for 3 years he had been powerless. Not anymore. "The man she was with," Julian said, "he looked wealthy, comfortable. She always had a taste for that." The words were bitter. He deliberately lived a modest lifestyle with her, wanting to build a life based on something other than money. He had a portfolio worth hundreds of millions, a foundation that reshaped city skylines, and he had lived with her in a pleasant but unremarkable suburban house, driving a 5-year-old car. He'd thought it was romantic, a testament to the purity of their connection. Now it just felt naive. "She left you for money," Arthur stated, not as a question, but as a conclusion. "She thought you lacked ambition. I remember the conversations, the little digs at your small-time firm." Julian flinched. He remembered them too. The gentle teasing about his modest projects, the wistful sighs when they passed by opulent mansions, the magazines featuring powerful CEOs left open on the coffee table. He had dismissed it as idle fantasy, as Alara's penchant for glamour. He had never imagined it was a verdict being passed on him, on their life together. "It appears so," Julian said, the admission tasting like ash. "Here we are," Arthur said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the screen. "License plate registered to a Marcus Thorne. Address is a penthouse apartment in the new Elysian Tower downtown." The name meant nothing to Julian, but the building did. The Elysian Tower was the pinnacle of new luxury in the city, a sleek glass spire where apartments sold for 8 figures. It was the kind of place Alara used to dream about. "Marcus Thorne," Arthur continued, his fingers tapping away, "founder and CEO of Thorne Development Group, specializes in high-end commercial and residential projects. Self-made according to his press, ambitious, ruthless, and it seems currently living with a woman named Lena Rousseau." "Lena Rousseau," Julian repeated the name. It felt alien, wrong, a cheap costume worn by his wife. "Date of birth, place of birth, it's a complete identity, Julian. A ghost, professionally done. New driver's license, new passport, new social security number. This wasn't an impulsive act. This was meticulously planned." Arthur's voice was grim. "And there's more. Thorn Development is currently trying to secure final round funding for a massive new project. The Azure Landing Resort. It's their biggest gamble yet. They're leveraged to the hilt. If they don't get this funding, they're facing catastrophic failure. A cold, beautiful, and terrible idea began to form in Julian's mind. It was intricate and cruel, a piece of architecture built not from stone, but from poetic justice. Who are they trying to get the funding from? Julian asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Arthur's research continued for another minute before he looked up, his eyes wide with a dawning, incredulous understanding of what Julian was thinking. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "They've been courting a number of venture capital firms and private equity groups, but their primary target, the one they've been desperately trying to get a meeting with, is a philanthropic foundation known for investing in large-scale, transformative urban projects." Julian didn't say anything. He just waited. Arthur leaned back, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. "They're trying to get funding from the Aethelred Foundation." The room was silent. Julian felt a sense of vertigo, as if the universe itself was conspiring to deliver his revenge. Ilara and her new lover, the man she'd chosen for his ambition and wealth, were unknowingly begging for money from the husband she'd abandoned for not having enough of either. The irony was so thick, so perfect, it was almost suffocating. "They've submitted a proposal, of course," Arthur continued, his voice now laced with a kind of predatory excitement. "It's been sitting in our preliminary review queue for weeks. A project of this scale would eventually need final approval from the Foundation's head, the man who makes all the final decisions." "Aethelred," Julian said, the name tasting different now. It was no longer a shield, it was a sword. "Exactly," Arthur confirmed. "They are desperate to meet a man who doesn't exist, or rather, a man they would never in a million years recognize." Julian stood up and walked to the large window that overlooked the city. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Down below, the lights of the city were beginning to twinkle to life, a galaxy of human ambition and desire. He could see the top of the Elysian Tower from here, a dark finger pointing at the sky. She was up there right now, in a multi-million-dollar apartment, living a life she had purchased with his grief. She was probably drinking champagne, celebrating her cleverness, her escape. She felt safe. She felt untouchable. She had underestimated him. They both had. They saw Julian Croft, the sad, unassuming architect. They had no idea that Ethelred was watching. "Arthur," Julian said, his back still to the room, "I want you to approve their request for a meeting." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "A meeting? With whom?" "With you at first. Lead them on. Let them think they're making progress. Let them get their hopes up. Let them taste the victory." Julian's voice was cold and precise. "I want them to be utterly convinced that the Aethelred Foundation is going to fund their project. I want them to stake everything on it." "And then?" Arthur asked, already knowing the answer. Julian turned from the window, his face cast in shadow. "And then," he said, "the mysterious Aethelred will decide to make a rare public appearance to announce the Foundation's next grand partnership at our annual charity gala." Arthur's grim smile widened. He understood completely. It was a stage. A public stage for a private execution. "They will be the guests of honor," Julian continued. "We will roll out the red carpet. We will put them in the spotlight. We will give them everything they've ever wanted. And in front of everyone, their friends, their peers, the entire city, I will take it all away." This wasn't just about exposing a lie anymore. This was about dismantling a life. It was about showing Ilara and the world what true power looked like. It wasn't the flashy, brittle wealth of Marcus Thorne. It was quiet, it was patient, and it was absolute. "Consider it done," Arthur said. "I'll make the call tomorrow. They'll be ecstatic." Julian nodded, turning back to the window. The city lights seemed brighter now. The grief that had clouded his world for 3 years was gone, burned away by the clean, clarifying fire of purpose. He was an architect again, and he was about to design the most spectacular collapse the city had ever seen. The days that followed were a masterclass in controlled patience. On the surface, Julian maintained his persona as the grieving widower. He went to his small office at the downtown firm, nodded at his sympathetic colleagues, and continued to work on his mundane projects. He was a ghost, haunting the periphery of life, and no one looked at him closely enough to see the change in his eyes, the new tension in his jaw. This anonymity, once a source of pain, was now his most valuable asset. Meanwhile, Arthur Vance was setting the stage. He contacted Thorne Development, introducing himself as the executive director of the Aethelred Foundation. As predicted, Marcus Thorne was ecstatic, practically tripping over himself to express his gratitude. Arthur, playing his part to perfection, was cordial but distant, the very model of a busy, powerful man. "Your proposal for Azure Landing is intriguing," he'd said over the phone, letting the word hang in the air. "The Foundation is always looking for bold projects. However, our benefactor, Aethelred, is exceptionally particular. We will require a great deal of due diligence." He strung them along for 2 weeks. He requested revised financials. He sent a junior team to their office to ask pointed questions. He made them work for it, letting their desperation build with every passing day. Julian received daily updates, reading the transcripts of their increasingly anxious calls with a cold, detached satisfaction. "He's worried," Arthur reported one evening, meeting Julian in the secret office. "Thorne is leveraged to the breaking point. The preliminary construction loans are coming due. If our funding doesn't materialize in the next month, his company will implode." "And Alara?" Julian asked, the name still feeling foreign. "Lena Rousseau?" "She's listed as a creative consultant on the project, a vanity title. Her name is on none of the official corporate documents, but she's on the bank accounts. She co-signed for a number of the bridge loans, using an inheritance as collateral." Arthur paused, a look of grim discovery on his face. An inheritance she received after the tragic death of her former self. Julian's blood ran cold. The life insurance. "Precisely," Arthur confirmed. "A $2 million policy. She forged your signature on the claim documents. It was expertly done. That money was the seed capital for their entire enterprise. They've been living off it and using it as leverage ever since." So his grief had funded their love affair. The money that was meant to secure his future in her absence had instead built her a new life with another man. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It wasn't just that she had left him, it was that she had made him pay for it. The knowledge hardened something within him, chipping away the last remnants of the man who had loved her. The man who might have, in some small corner of his heart, hoped this was all a terrible misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding. This was a calculated betrayal of the highest order. He decided it was time for the next step. It wasn't enough to read reports. He needed to see them again, to look them in the eye, to feel the texture of their lies. "Arthur," he said, "where are they having dinner tonight?" Arthur, ever prepared, consulted his tablet. "Thorne has a reservation for 2 at Celeste at 8 p.m., celebrating, I imagine. I sent them a preliminary letter of intent this afternoon. Non-binding, of course, but it was enough to make them feel like they've won." Celeste. It was one of the most exclusive restaurants in the city, with a 3-month waiting list. It was where he had planned to take Alara to propose a decade ago. Another stolen memory. "Good," Julian said. "I think it's time Julian Croft had a night out." That evening, Julian stood in front of the mirror in his small apartment. He didn't dress as Aethelred in a bespoke suit of quiet power. He dressed as Julian Croft, the man they thought they knew. A simple, slightly worn sports coat, a button-down shirt, trousers that were neat but not fashionable. He looked like what he was supposed to be, a man out of his depth, a man who didn't belong. He arrived at Celeste without a reservation. The hostess, a woman with a practiced, dismissive smile, looked him up and down with thinly veiled disdain. "I'm sorry, sir, but we are fully booked for the next several months." "I'm just meeting someone for a drink at the bar," Julian lied smoothly. "I won't be long." She hesitated, but his quiet, unassuming demeanor worked in his favor. He seemed harmless. She waved him through with an impatient flick of her wrist. The restaurant was a symphony of hushed tones, clinking crystal, and low, confident laughter. And there they were, seated at one of the best tables in the house, a small booth overlooking the city lights. Ilara, Lena, was radiant. She was wearing a black silk dress, and the sapphire pendant rested in the hollow of her throat, drinking in the low light. Marcus Thorne was leaning back, a glass of wine in his hand, a smug, victorious look on his face. They were toasting to their future, to the Aethelred Foundation, to him. Julian walked to the bar, his back to them, and ordered a glass of water. He watched them in the reflection of the mirror behind the bar. He watched them laugh, their heads close together. He saw Marcus reach across the table and touch her hand, the same casual intimacy he'd seen at the market. He took a slow sip of water, his hand steady. The anger was a low, controlled burn. He was an architect surveying a site before demolition. He needed to see the weak points, the structural flaws. After a few minutes, he turned and began to walk towards their table, his path deliberately chosen to take him right past them. He kept his eyes down, feigning distraction, as if he were looking for someone. As he drew level with their booth, he stumbled, his hand reaching out to steady himself on the edge of their table. "Oh, excuse me," he said, his voice pitched with mild embarrassment. "So sorry to disturb you." Marcus Thorne looked up, his expression instantly annoyed, the look of a king whose court has been intruded upon by a peasant. Ilara's eyes met Julian's, and for a split second, a flicker of something, confusion, alarm, crossed her face. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by a mask of cold indifference. "Watch where you're going," Marcus snapped, his voice low and sharp. Julian ignored him, his eyes fixed on Ilara. "I'm so sorry," he said again, his gaze soft, filled with a manufactured, heartbreaking confusion. He let a wounded look enter his eyes. You look so much like my late wife." The lie was perfect. It reframed his appearance at the market. It explained his presence. It painted him exactly as they wanted to see him, a pathetic, grieving man lost in a delusion. Ilara's posture stiffened. She exchanged a quick, panicked look with Marcus. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, her voice tight and formal, her eyes refusing to truly meet his. "But you're mistaken." I know, it's just—" Julian let his gaze drift down to the sapphire at her throat. He didn't point, he just looked. "That pendant, it's beautiful. My Ilara had one just like it, identical. I had it made for her." He looked back into her eyes, his expression one of pure, painful sincerity. "The resemblance is just uncanny." For a moment, I really thought— He let the sentence hang, full of unspoken pain. He saw the flash of genuine fear in her eyes this time. The pendant was the one detail they couldn't explain away. A doppelganger was one thing. A doppelganger with a one-of-a-kind piece of jewelry was another. Marcus Thorne, seeing her distress, moved from annoyance to aggression. He stood up, using his height to loom over Julian. "Listen, pal," he said, his voice a low growl. "You've been told. You're mistaken. Now I suggest you move along before you cause a scene and embarrass yourself further." The threat was clear. The condescension was palpable. He was dismissing Julian like a piece of trash. Julian held his ground but kept the wounded, harmless expression on his face. "Of course. I'm so sorry. Please forgive the intrusion." He backed away slowly, never taking his eyes off Elara until the last moment. He gave her one final, lingering look of tragic recognition, then turned and walked towards the exit. He didn't look back. He could feel their eyes on him, feel their agitated, whispered conversation begin before he was even out the door. He had accomplished his mission. He had rattled them. He had planted a seed of doubt and fear in the fertile ground of their deception. They were no longer celebrating. They were looking over their shoulders. They thought they had dealt with a sad, random encounter. They had no idea they had just been inspected by their executioner. As he stepped out into the cool night air, Julian allowed himself a small, cold smile. The trap was now baited, and they were growing more desperate by the second. The gala was in 2 weeks. All the pieces were moving into place. The demolition was on schedule. The next 2 weeks were a study in escalating tension. For Marcus and Elara, it was a frantic, hopeful push toward the finish line. For Julian, it was the quiet, methodical placement of the final charges before a controlled demolition. Arthur kept the pressure on. He made them jump through more hoops for the foundation, requesting personal financial statements, detailed projections, and character references. Each request was designed to make them feel that victory was closer, that this was the final stage of vetting before the glorious announcement. Marcus, blinded by his own ambition and the sheer size of the potential investment, complied with everything. He sent over documents that detailed his entire financial life, including the accounts he shared with Lena Rousseau. He was, in effect, handing Julian the schematics of his own downfall. Elara, however, was becoming unnerved. The encounter at the restaurant had shaken her far more than she let on. The man, her husband Julian, was supposed to be a ghost of the past, a sad memory in a life she had successfully shed. But he wasn't a ghost. He was real, and he had seen her. Twice. "It's just a coincidence," Marcus insisted one evening in their gleaming penthouse, pouring 2 glasses of expensive champagne. "The man is grieving. He's seeing things. It's pathetic, is what it is." "But the necklace, Marcus," Elara said, her hand instinctively going to the sapphire at her throat. "He recognized it. He said he had it made. What if he starts looking into it? What if he gets suspicious?" "Suspicious of what?" Marcus scoffed, handing her a glass. "That a woman who looks like his dead wife happens to own a similar piece of jewelry? It's a coincidence. A 1 in a million chance, maybe, but still a coincidence. You need to relax, Lena. We are on the verge of everything we've worked for. The Aethelred Foundation is practically begging to give us $250 million. Don't let some sad sack widower spook you now." She tried to believe him. She wanted to believe him. She looked around the penthouse, at the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering city below. This was the life she had chosen, the life she had killed for. She couldn't let it slip away because of a ghost. She took the champagne and drank it down. Meanwhile, Julian was preparing. The annual Aethelred Foundation Charity Gala was the most exclusive event of the year, a gathering of the city's most powerful and influential figures. This year, Arthur's office sent out special invitations to Marcus Thorne and Ms. Lena Rousseau. They were not just invited, they were to be the guests of honor. The Foundation's benefactor, Aethelred, has been deeply impressed with the vision of Azure Landing, Arthur's invitation read. He has taken a personal interest and wishes to announce this transformative partnership at the gala. A table has been reserved for you at the front of the ballroom. It was the ultimate validation. Marcus was insufferable in his triumph. He paraded the invitation around to his business associates, his bankers, his rivals. He was no longer just a developer. He was the chosen one, handpicked by the mythical Ethelred. His financial troubles were about to be a distant memory. Julian, through Arthur's discreet surveillance, watched all of this unfold. He saw the receipts for Elara's gala dress, a couture gown worth more than his monthly salary at the small firm. He saw the reservations Marcus made for a celebratory trip to Monaco, scheduled for the day after the gala. They weren't just confident, they were arrogant. Their hubris was the final, critical element. It made them blind. The night of the gala arrived. It was a perfect, clear evening. The venue was the grand atrium of the Museum of Modern Art, a vast, cathedral-like space with soaring ceilings and walls of glass. Julian had designed the wing himself years ago, under his real name, one of his last major public projects before he had retreated into the persona of Aethelred. The symmetry was not lost on him. He was about to tear down his personal life in a building he had created. He arrived early, entering through a private service entrance. He wasn't dressed as Julian Croft tonight. He wore a perfectly tailored dark suit by a designer so exclusive he had no labels. It was the uniform of a man whose power was inherent, not advertised. He stood on a balcony overlooking the main floor, watching as the guests began to arrive. The mayor was there, so were titans of industry, celebrated artists, and old money philanthropists. It was a sea of power and influence, and tonight he controlled the tides. He saw them arrive. Marcus Thorne was beaming, his chest puffed out in his tuxedo. He moved through the crowd like a conquering hero, shaking hands, accepting premature congratulations. And then he saw Ilara. She was breathtaking. Her gown shimmered under the lights, and her hair was swept up in an elegant style that showcased the lines of her neck and, of course, the sapphire pendant. She looked like a queen. But as she drew closer, Julian could see the fine lines of tension around her eyes. The way her smile didn't quite reach them. She was playing a part, and the costume was beginning to feel heavy. He watched them take their seats at the table of honor, directly in front of the large stage. Her family was there too. Her father, Richard, a proud, stern man who had always been disappointed in Julian's perceived lack of ambition. Her mother, a woman obsessed with social standing. They were all beaming, so proud of their daughter and her impressive new partner. They were all complicit. They had mourned with him at her memorial, their faces masks of sorrow. Now they sat celebrating her fraudulent new life. They would fall with her. The evening progressed. There were speeches. There was a lavish dinner. Julian remained unseen, a silent observer from the shadows of the balcony. He felt a strange sense of calm, the quiet focus that came before a major presentation. He felt no rage, no desire for a screaming confrontation. He was simply an architect about to reveal a fatal structural flaw. The truth was his blueprint. Finally, the moment arrived. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. Arthur Vance walked onto the stage, his presence commanding the cavernous room. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests," Arthur began, his voice smooth and resonant. "Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate the spirit of philanthropy and innovation. For years, the Ethelred Foundation has been guided by a single, visionary mind. A man who believes that the structures we build should elevate the human spirit. He has for his entire career chosen to remain anonymous, believing the work should speak for itself." A murmur went through the crowd. The identity of Aethelred was the city's greatest mystery. "Tonight, however, is a special occasion," Arthur continued, his eyes finding the table where Marcus and Ilara sat. "The foundation is on the cusp of its most ambitious partnership to date, a project so bold, so transformative, that our founder has decided that the time for anonymity is over. He wishes to announce this partnership himself." At the front table, Marcus Thorne preened. He subtly straightened his bow tie. He gave Ilara's hand a confident squeeze. This was his moment. Ilara, however, looked pale. The spotlight felt hot, exposing. Something felt wrong. A primal sense of dread was beginning to crawl up her spine. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur's voice boomed, "it is my profound honor to introduce to you, for the very first time, the founder, the benefactor, the chief architect of the Aethelred Foundation, the man known as Aethelred." All eyes turned to the stage. The room was utterly silent, holding its collective breath. From the wings, a figure emerged, walking calmly into the center of the spotlight. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit. He moved with a quiet, unshakable confidence. It was Julian. The gasp from the front table was audible, even over the sudden, confused whispers that rippled through the hall. Marcus Thorne's smug smile froze, then collapsed into a mask of utter disbelief. He looked from the man on stage to the program, which listed the speaker as Ethelred, then back again. It didn't compute, but it was Alara's reaction that was the most profound. Her face went ashen, all the color drained away, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. Her eyes were wide with a horror so absolute it was paralyzing. The ghost from the market, the sad widower from the restaurant, was on the stage, bathed in a light of impossible power. The two separate worlds she had so carefully constructed had just collided with the force of a supernova. Julian walked to the podium. He didn't look at them, not yet. He scanned the room, his calm gaze sweeping over the hundreds of powerful faces, looking up at him in stunned silence. "Good evening," he said, his voice amplified by the microphone. It was the same quiet, measured voice everyone knew as Julian Crofts, but it was imbued with a new weight, a new authority. "I apologize for the long-held secrecy. I have always believed that a man's work should define him, not his name or his net worth." He paused, letting the statement sink in. "Tonight, I was meant to announce a new partnership, a project called Azure Landing." He spoke the name, and at the front table, Marcus flinched as if struck. "It's a project built on a grand vision, but as an architect, I know that a vision is only as strong as its foundation. And a foundation, to be sound, must be built on truth." He finally allowed his gaze to drift down, to find their table, to lock eyes with them. He looked first at Marcus. The man behind this project, Mr. Marcus Thorne, is the very picture of ambition. He has built an impressive portfolio. Julian's voice was even, almost conversational. Then, large images began to appear on the giant screen behind him. Bank statements, loan applications. Unfortunately, it seems that portfolio was built, in part, with stolen funds, specifically a $2 million life insurance policy that belonged to another man. A collective gasp went through the room. Marcus Thorne looked as if he'd been turned to stone, his face a grotesque mixture of terror and confusion. Julian's eyes then moved to Alara. She was trembling, her hand at her throat, clutching the sapphire pendant as if it could save her. "Mr. Thorne had a partner in this," Julian continued, his voice softening with a devastating, feigned pity. "A creative consultant named Lena Rousseau." On the screen behind him, a photo appeared. It was Alara laughing in the sun at the farmer's market, her hand on Marcus's arm. Next to it, another photo appeared, a wedding portrait of Julian and Alara, smiling, happy, years ago. The resemblance was no longer uncanny, it was absolute. "Lena Rousseau, however, is a fiction," Julian said, his voice ringing with clarity in the silent room. "She is a ghost. Her real name is Alara Croft, my wife." The last two words landed with the force of a physical impact. The room erupted in a chaotic explosion of sound. Shock, outrage, disbelief. People were standing up, turning to stare at the front table, where Alara now looked like she was about to faint. "My wife," Julian repeated, his voice cutting through the noise, silencing the room once more. "Who, with Mr. Thorne, faked her own death 3 years ago in a boating accident. Who allowed me to grieve? Who allowed me to bury what I thought were her ashes? Who collected on my love and my pain to fund a new life with a richer, more ambitious man?" He let the accusation hang in the air, stark and brutal. He then looked directly at Alara, his eyes no longer filled with pity, but with a cold, clear judgment. "You were right about one thing, Alara," he said, his voice dropping to an almost intimate level, yet still carrying throughout the entire hall. "You did think I lacked ambition. You saw Julian Croft, the quiet architect, and you found him wanting. You were so busy looking at the life you wanted, you never bothered to look at the man you had. He gestured to the room, to the stage, to the Ethelred logo on the screen behind him. This, this is what you left. You traded a man who built an empire in secret for a man who would steal from a widower to build a house of cards. He looked at Marcus Thorne, whose face had crumpled in on itself. Mr. Thorne, your funding is of course denied. My legal team has already been in contact with the district attorney's office regarding insurance fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. I believe they are waiting for you outside. As if on cue, the main doors of the atrium opened, and several uniformed police officers and plainclothes detectives stepped inside, their presence a stark, brutal confirmation of Julian's words. Finally, he looked back at Alara. She was openly weeping now, her body shaking with silent, racking sobs. Her father, Richard, had stood up, his face purple with rage and humiliation. "You have no right," Richard sputtered, pointing a trembling finger at the stage. Julian's gaze flickered to him, cold and dismissive. "I have every right. You stood at my side and comforted me while knowing my wife was alive. Your disgrace is your own." He returned his attention to Alara one last time. "The sapphire," he said quietly. "I told you it was the color of the deep ocean. I never imagined you would take that so literally. You can keep it, a reminder of the depth of your betrayal." With that, he turned his back on them. He looked out at the stunned, silent crowd. "My apologies, ladies and gentlemen, for this unorthodox announcement. The Ethelred Foundation will, of course, continue its work. But tonight is about closing a chapter. Thank you." He walked off the stage, not looking back as the chaos erupted behind him. He didn't see Alara finally collapse. He didn't see Marcus Thorne being quietly and efficiently surrounded by detectives. He didn't see the flashbulbs of reporters who had just stumbled upon the story of the decade. He just walked, his steps even and sure, through the private exit and out into the cool, clean night air. The demolition was complete. The ground was clear. Now he could begin to build again. The immediate aftermath was a maelstrom. The gala, intended as a celebration of philanthropy, had become the stage for the city's most scandalous drama in a generation. News vans swarmed the Museum of Modern Art, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like metallic sunflowers. The story was a perfect storm of wealth, betrayal, and a stunning reversal of fortune. The reclusive billionaire Ethelred was revealed to be the unassuming Julian Croft, and his dead wife was neither dead nor his. Julian was insulated from the initial blast by Arthur Vance's formidable legal and public relations machine. While the city feasted on the salacious details, Julian was secluded in his real office, the Ethelred headquarters, watching the fallout on a bank of silent monitors. He saw Marcus Thorne, his face a mask of gray defeat, being led in handcuffs to an unmarked car. He saw Alara, shielded by paramedics in a hastily thrown blanket, being loaded into an ambulance, having succumbed to what was later described as a psychosomatic collapse. He saw her father, Richard, his face a thundercloud of fury and shame, shouting, "No comment!" as reporters shoved microphones in his face. It was a spectacle of ruin, and Julian felt a profound and unsettling emptiness watching it. He had expected satisfaction, a sense of triumphant vindication. Instead, he just felt tired. The anger that had fueled him for weeks had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold ash of his original grief. He had exposed the truth, and the truth was ugly and sad. Arthur entered the room, holding a tablet. "The DA's office has everything," he said, his voice crisp. "The forged signatures, the bank transfers from the insurance payout, the fake identity documents we uncovered for Lena Rousseau. They have a rock-solid case for multiple felonies. They won't be seeing the outside of a courtroom for a very long time." Julian nodded, his eyes still on the silent screens. "And her family?" "Social and financial ruin," Arthur stated bluntly. Richard's firm is built on a reputation of integrity. That's gone. His partners are already moving to oust him. The story of how they stood by and watched you grieve is toxic. They'll be pariahs. It was exactly the outcome he had engineered. Poetic justice, perfectly delivered. So why did it feel so hollow? You did what you had to do, Julian, Arthur said, sensing his mood. He placed a hand on Julian's shoulder. This wasn't revenge. This was pest control. They were a sickness in your life, and you cured it. It was never going to be a pleasant process. Perhaps Arthur was right. Julian had spent 3 years living in a house built on a lie. He had just torn it down to the studs. The emptiness he felt wasn't a lack of victory. It was the chilling silence after a necessary demolition. The site was clear, but nothing new had been built yet. In the weeks that followed, the legal proceedings against Alara and Marcus began. The media frenzy slowly died down, replaced by the methodical, grinding wheels of the justice system. Marcus, facing the collapse of his company and a long prison sentence, turned on Alara completely, claiming she had masterminded the entire scheme and manipulated him with promises of a shared fortune. Ilara, in turn, painted herself as a victim, a woman who had made a terrible mistake under the influence of a predatory man. Their love affair, once celebrated with champagne in a penthouse, had devolved into a bitter, desperate scramble for survival in the sterile environment of lawyers' offices. Julian refused to engage. He gave his deposition, a calm, factual account of events, and instructed Arthur to handle everything else. He did not want to see her. He did not want to speak to her. He had said everything he needed to say on that stage. But one day, a letter arrived. It was hand-delivered to Arthur's office, a simple white envelope with his name on it, written in Alara's familiar, elegant script. Against his better judgment, he had Arthur bring it to him. Inside, the letter was short. Julian, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. I know an apology is meaningless, but I cannot move forward into whatever is left of my life without seeing you one last time. Not to ask for forgiveness, but to give an explanation. Please, my lawyer can arrange a neutral location. Please, Alara. He read it several times. The architect in him saw it as a final, necessary inspection of the wreckage. The man in him recoiled at the thought of seeing her again, of opening that wound. But the part of him that was Athelred, the strategist, knew that true closure required facing the source of the failure head-on. He needed to see if there was anything at all, to salvage from the memory of the woman he had once loved. He agreed. The meeting was set for a conference room in a neutral law firm's building. It was a soulless space with a large mahogany table, uncomfortable chairs, and a view of a brick wall. It was the perfect setting for an autopsy. Julian arrived first with Arthur. He was calm, dressed in a simple suit, the quiet confidence of Athelred now fully integrated into his being. She entered a few minutes later, accompanied by her lawyer. The change in her was shocking. The radiant, confident woman from the market was gone. The glamorous queen from the gala was gone. The woman who stood before him was diminished. She was pale and thin, her expensive clothes hanging loosely on her frame. Her hair was unstyled, and her eyes were shadowed with exhaustion and fear. She looked like a ghost, but not the glamorous phantom she had pretended to be. She looked like a real one, haunted and lost. Their lawyers exchanged brief, professional nods and then discreetly exited the room, leaving the four of them alone at the vast table. Arthur stood silently by the door, a sentinel. Ilara wouldn't look at him at first. She stared at her hands, which were twisting a damp tissue on the polished surface of the table. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Julian remained silent, his expression unreadable. He would not make this easy for her. Finally, she looked up, and her eyes were filled with a despair so complete it was almost frightening. "I know nothing I say can change what I did," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know, It wasn't always about the money. Julian's eyebrow raised slightly, the first reaction he had shown. In the beginning, she struggled, it was about feeling alive. Our life, Julian, it was so quiet, so predictable. I loved you, I did. But I felt like I was fading, like I was becoming a part of the comfortable, beige background. Marcus, he was exciting. He saw a version of me that was grander, more vibrant. He made me feel like the star of a movie. So you faked your death, Julian said, his voice flat, cutting through her narrative. For excitement. No, she shook her head, tears beginning to well. It started as an affair, a stupid, selfish affair. But then Marcus's business was in trouble. He was talking about losing everything. And the idea came up. It was a joke at first. A dark, insane joke. What if I just disappeared? We could have the insurance money. We could start over, somewhere new. The life he promised me could be real. She took a shaky breath. The more we talked about it, the less crazy it seemed. We convinced ourselves it wasn't really hurting anyone. You were strong, you would grieve, and you would move on. You had your work. The money was just sitting there. It felt like a victimless crime, a fantasy we could make real. Julian stared at her, his expression hardening. A victimless crime? He repeated, his voice dangerously low. I spent 1,000 days believing you were dead. I held a memorial for you. I scattered ashes into the ocean and wept for a woman who was sipping cocktails in a penthouse apartment. I fell apart, Ilara. My life stopped. And you call that victimless? No, she cried, the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. It was monstrous. I see that now. We were living in a fantasy, and we refused to see the reality of what we had done. Every time I thought of you, I had to tell myself the story again and again, that you were better off, that you would find someone else. I had to believe it, or I couldn't live with myself. And the necklace? Julian asked, his voice like ice. Was that part of the fantasy? Wearing my gift while you live with him? She flinched as if he'd slapped her. I couldn't take it off, she whispered. It was the last piece of you, the last piece of the person I used to be. I know it makes no sense. I was a fraud, wearing the one true thing I had left. He was silent for a long time, processing her words. It wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. A pathetic, selfish, and deeply human confession of weakness and moral failure. She hadn't done it because she was a monster. She had done it because she was weak, and she had allowed her weakness to curdle into monstrosity. You didn't come here for an explanation, Julian said finally, his voice quiet but firm. You came here for absolution, and I cannot give it to you. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking. I know. Your actions have consequences, Ilara. You and Marcus will face the judgment of the law. Your family will face the judgment of society. That is justice. It's clean. It's structural. He leaned forward slightly. My judgment is something different. I don't hate you. I don't wish you ill. I simply don't see you anymore. The woman I loved is dead. She died 3 years ago on that boat. You are a stranger who happens to be wearing her face. A stranger who made some very, very poor choices. He stood up. Arthur moved to open the door. I hope, for your sake, that you find a way to live with the person you've become, Julian said, his voice devoid of malice or pity. It was simply a statement of fact. Goodbye, Lena. He used the fake name deliberately, a final, clean severance. He turned and walked out of the room without looking back, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her life. As he walked down the hallway, he did not feel triumphant. He did not feel angry. He felt the quiet, profound peace of a door finally, irrevocably, closed. The ghost had been laid to rest. A year passed. The city, with its short memory, moved on to other scandals. The names Marcus Thorne and Ilara Croft faded from the headlines, relegated to the dry legal columns that reported on their sentencing. Marcus received 7 years for fraud. Alara, in a more lenient judgment due to her cooperation in perceived manipulation, received 3 years, with parole possible after 18 months. Her family sold their home and moved away, seeking anonymity in a different state. For Julian, the year was one of profound transformation. He did not retreat back into the shadows. He embraced his dual identity. To the world, he was now Julian Croft, the brilliant and formerly reclusive architect known as Aethelred. He stepped into the role with a quiet grace and a renewed sense of purpose. He stopped taking on the small, uninspired projects. He poured his energy and the full resources of the Aethelred Foundation into work that mattered. He designed a state-of-the-art public library for a low-income neighborhood. He funded and designed a shelter for homeless families that was not just a place to sleep, but a beautiful, dignified space designed to foster hope. He created parks and public squares that brought communities together. His grief, once a destructive force that had hollowed him out, was now sublimated into a creative one. The pain of Alara's betrayal had taught him a valuable lesson about foundations. A life, like a building, needed to be built on something real and true. Love, integrity, purpose. His life with Alara had been built on a lie she had told herself, and a lie he had told himself. He had believed their love was enough, ignoring the cracks that were already there. He was no longer the sad widower or the cold avenger. He was simply Julian, an architect, a builder. He found a quiet joy in his work, in seeing his designs come to life and make a tangible difference in people's lives. The emptiness he had felt after the gala slowly filled, not with romance, but with a deep and abiding sense of purpose. One afternoon, he was visiting the construction site of the new library. The steel frame was up, a skeleton of promise reaching for the sky. He stood looking at the blueprints, a breeze ruffling his hair. He felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Arthur Vance found him there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "It's going to be beautiful, Julian," Arthur said, handing him a cup. "It's going to be useful," Julian corrected with a small smile. "The beauty is just a bonus." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the welders send showers of sparks into the air. "I heard she was released," Arthur said quietly, his gaze fixed on the structure. "Alara, paroled last week." Julian took a sip of his coffee. He felt nothing. The name was just a name, a footnote in a chapter that was long since finished. He felt no anger, no curiosity, no pity. "I hope she builds something better this time," he said, and he was surprised to find that he meant it. Her future was her own concern, a project he had no part in. His own blueprints were spread out before him, and they were far more interesting. "You know," Arthur said, a rare note of personal reflection in his voice, "for a while there I was worried. I thought the anger would consume you, that you'd become as cold and empty as the justice you were serving." Julian looked at the library taking shape. He thought of the families who would use the shelter, the children who would play in the parks he designed. "An architect can't afford to be empty," he said. "You have to have a vision of what you want to build. For 3 years, my vision was clouded by the past. Now I'm only looking forward." He rolled up the blueprints, the crisp paper crackling in the quiet afternoon. He had faced the ultimate betrayal and had not let it break him. He had taken the rubble of his old life and used it as the foundation for something stronger, something more honest, something that would last. The pain had been a fire that had burned away everything that was not essential, leaving behind a man who knew, with absolute certainty, who he was and what he was meant to build. The story of Julian and Alara became a kind of modern fable in the city, a cautionary tale about a woman who chased a glittering illusion and a man who found his true strength in the wreckage of a lie. It serves as a powerful reminder that true worth isn't about what you have, but about who you are. Patience, integrity, and a foundation built on truth will always, in the end, be more powerful than any fortune built on deception. What do you think? Was Julian's response justified, or did he go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. It's in these moments of reflection that we can all learn something about ourselves. Thank you for being here for this journey. If you found value in this story, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice, redemption, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Until next time, build your life on a strong foundation.